This week, we are continuing with Chapter 3, and we are going to bring together several of the ideas we have been exploring throughout the course. We are going to think about aging, identity, gender, sexuality, family, and the life course. One of the most important ideas we have encountered so far is that there is no single experience of aging. People experience aging differently depending on their social circumstances, their identities, their relationships, and the historical period in which they live. This week gives us two particularly interesting examples of that idea. Our first supplemental reading is Towards a Sociological Imagination of Menopause by Shawnee Orgad and Belinda Steffen. Our second is LGBTQ plus individuals and family relationships through a life course perspective by Gael Mesley, Armand Dory, and Stephen Russell. Although these articles focus on very different experiences, they are asking a similar sociological question. How are individual experiences shaped by the larger social world? Let's begin with menopause. Menopause is obviously a biological process. It involves changes in the reproductive system and eventually the end of menstruation. But the authors of our first article ask us to think about what happens when we look at menopause through the sociological imagination. The sociological imagination asks us to connect personal experiences with larger cultural narratives, institutions, and social structures. So instead of asking only, what happens to a woman's body during menopause? We can ask, how does society teach women to understand what is happening to their bodies? That is a very different question. Orgad and Stefan argue that menopause is produced through an interaction between women's bodies and the social norms and expectations surrounding those bodies. Although menopause is a biological process, the ways it is understood and experienced are deeply influenced by cultural narratives about aging, femininity, the body, sexuality, and decline. Think about what our culture tends to communicate about women's bodies. Youth is often associated with beauty, youth is associated with fertility, youth is associated with desirability, and older women's bodies are frequently represented as moving away from those ideals. This means that menopause can become about much more than the biological transition itself. It can become associated with ideas about becoming old, losing femininity, losing sexual attractiveness, becoming less productive, or becoming less socially valued. The authors point out that dominant cultural narratives have historically represented menopausal women and their bodies as declining, decaying, redundant, or incompetent. These ideas can contribute to the social devaluation of the aging female body. This is a perfect example of what we discussed earlier in the semester when we talked about social construction and ageism. The biological process is real, but the meaning attached to that biological process is social, and those meanings can have consequences. One of the fascinating things about this article is that the social meaning of menopause is not static. It is changing. Menopause has received considerably more public attention in recent years. Celebrities, social media personalities, medical professionals, activists, and other public figures have helped bring menopause into public conversations. At first glance, this increased visibility seems entirely positive. If something has historically been invisible or difficult to talk about, bringing it into public conversation can help people feel less isolated. But sociology asks us to look at visibility critically as well. Who gets to define the conversation? Who gets to speak as an expert? Which experiences are represented and which experiences remain invisible? The authors point out that contemporary discussions of menopause are increasingly shaped by a wide range of experts, including doctors, activists, celebrities, media professionals, and social media influencers. At the same time, the experiences and knowledge of women across differences of class, race, ethnicity, sexuality, location, and disability can remain marginalized. This is another important sociological lesson. There is rarely just one version of a social experience. Menopause does not mean exactly the same thing to every woman. The experience can be influenced by socioeconomic status, race, culture, sexuality, disability, work, family relationships, access to healthcare, and the particular historical period in which someone experiences it. So, once again, We are moving away from the idea of a universal aging experience. Now let's turn to our second supplemental reading. The article by Mesley, Dory, and Russell examines LGBTQ plus individuals and family relationships through a life course perspective. This article gives us another way to understand why historical context matters so much when we study aging. Life course theory emphasizes the relationship between individual lives and historical change. In other words, the year you were born matters. The historical events that happen during your lifetime matter. The social attitudes that exist while you are growing up matter. And the institutions and opportunities available to you at different points in your life matter. The authors explain that major social changes over recent decades have fundamentally changed the possibilities for LGBTQ plus people to form partnerships and families. Life course theory helps us understand these changes because it allows researchers to examine how different generations experience the same life events under very different historical circumstances. Think about the experience of coming out. Coming out can be an extremely significant event in a person's life, but the meaning and consequences of coming out depend partly on when and where it happens. Someone who came out in the 1950s encountered a very different social environment from someone who came out in the 1990s. And someone coming out today encounters yet another social environment. The researchers describe coming out as a potential turning point in the life course. A turning point is an event or transition that can significantly alter the direction of someone's life. Coming out can affect family relationships, friendships, romantic relationships, social networks, and identity. But the authors also emphasize that these experiences are connected to historical change. You cannot completely understand someone's coming out experience without understanding the social world in which it occurred. The article gives us an excellent example of this through generational differences. Younger LGBTQ plus generations have generally been coming out earlier in life than older generations. The article describes research showing that average ages of coming out have decreased substantially across generations. That does not necessarily mean that younger people have easier lives. Coming out can still involve fear, uncertainty, and the possibility of negative reactions. But the social context has changed, visibility has increased, legal rights have changed, public attitudes have changed, media representation has changed, and opportunities for LGBTQ plus people to form relationships and families have changed. This gives us a powerful example of what life course theory means by cohort. A cohort is a group of people who experience important historical events during similar periods of their lives. Two people can have the same chronological age but belong to different social generations, depending on the historical circumstances that shape their lives. And this matters enormously when we study aging. Imagine two LGBTQ plus adults who are both 70 years old. They share a chronological age, but they may have grown up under very different social conditions. One may have spent much of their young adulthood in a period when homosexuality was heavily stigmatized and same sex relationships were not legally recognized. Another person of the same age may have experienced very different opportunities later in life as laws and social attitudes changed. So, chronological age alone does not tell us their story. We need to know their history, we need to know their social context, and we need to know the relationships that shaped their lives. This brings us to another important life course concept from the article Linked Lives. The idea of linked lives is that our lives are interconnected with the lives of other people. Our experiences are not entirely individual. Our parents affect us. Our children affect us. Our partners affect us. Our friends affect us. Our communities affect us. And changes in our lives can affect the people around us. The authors use linked lives to help explain LGBTQ plus identity and family relationships across generations. The relationships and social networks surrounding an individual can influence identity development, family formation, and later life experiences. This connects beautifully with what we discussed earlier in the course about family and care. When we talk about aging, we sometimes imagine an older individual as though they are aging in isolation, but nobody really ages alone. People age within families, they age within friendships, they age within communities, they age within social institutions, and they age within historical circumstances. This is particularly important when we think about LGBTQ plus older adults. The meaning of family may not always be limited to biological relatives. People may have partners, friends, chosen family, community networks, and other relationships that provide support and connection. The life course perspective allows us to see these relationships as part of the larger story of aging. Now let's bring the two readings together. At first, menopause and LGBTQ plus family relationships might seem like completely separate topics. But sociologically, they illustrate many of the same principles. Both remind us that the body does not exist outside of society. Both show us that identity is shaped through social relationships and cultural meanings. Both demonstrate the importance of historical context, and both challenge the idea that there is one universal experience of aging. The menopause article asks us to think about how gender and cultural expectations shape the experience of an aging body. The LGBTQ plus article asks us to think about how sexuality, family, historical change, and relationships shape the life course. Together, they demonstrate why an intersectional perspective is so important. Age does not operate independently from gender. Age does not operate independently from sexuality. Age does not operate independently from race or social class. And age does not operate independently from our relationships. These different dimensions of social life intersect. This is also why we need to be careful when we talk about older adults, as though that phrase describes one unified group. There are millions of different ways to experience later life. Some people experience aging with strong family support. Others rely primarily on friends or chosen family. Some people experience aging with financial security. Others experience economic insecurity. Some people experience their bodies as healthy and capable. Others live with chronic illness or disability. Some people experience their identities as increasingly accepted over their lifetime. Others have spent decades navigating discrimination. And some people experience dramatic social change during their own lifetimes. This last point is particularly important. Imagine being born into a society where something about your identity is considered unacceptable, illegal, or even invisible, and then living long enough to see that same identity become publicly recognized and legally protected. That is a life course experience. Your individual life has unfolded alongside historical change. And that is exactly what the sociological perspective allows us to see. So, as we finish chapter 3, I want you to think about aging as something that happens at the intersection of the individual and the social world. Our bodies change, our identities can change, our relationships change, our families change, our societies change. And the meanings we attach to all of those changes can change as well. The sociological imagination helps us connect personal experiences to those larger social forces. The life course perspective helps us understand how those experiences unfold across time. And an intersectional perspective helps us understand why people who are the same age can have dramatically different experiences of aging. As you finish this week's readings, I want you to think about three questions. How does your historical moment shape your experience of aging? How do your identities influence the way society responds to you as you age? And how do the people in your life shape your experience of growing older? Those questions take us a long way beyond simply asking how old someone is. They allow us to ask the much more interesting sociological question: what kind of life has this person lived, and what social world has shaped that life? That is where the life course perspective becomes so powerful. And it is a perfect place to pause before our midterm because we have now built a foundation for understanding aging as biological, social, historical, relational, and deeply unequal.